Yeah. Hello. This is the final Northeastern game speaker series talk for spring 2025, based out of Northeastern University. If you'd like to find more information about our game design programs, you can find information about our GS&D, Master of Science in Game Science and Design, at our website, northeastern.edu. We also offer a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Game Design as well, and the Master is offered across multiple campuses. Our final talk is with Mark Kleback. Mark is a fabricator located in Brooklyn, New York. He's been collaborating with independent game developers for the past 15 years to build custom physical manifestations of their games in the form of arcade cabinets. In 2019, Mark and his partner Stephanie opened Wonderville, a bar event space and free play arcade consisting solely independently produced arcade games. Wonderville hosts community events such as playtest nights, game jams, and residency programs for the greater New York City games community. Mark has also built custom arcade cabinets for corporate clients such as JetBlue, CenturyLink, Twilio, and Soylent, as well as educational institutions like Pratt University and Quinnipiac University. Is that pronounced right?
Yeah, Quinnipiac.
Okay, cool. I was going to say, I'm glad I nailed that one. In addition to Wonderville, Mark teaches a graduate level class at ITP program at NYU called The New Arcade, which involves Unity game development, Arduino physical computing, 3D modeling, and Fusion 360, and CNC fabrication. Students create custom arcade cabinets with unique interfaces and alt control games as part of this class. Projects from this class have been showcased at GDC and MagFest, as well as other festivals around the country. I'm also really excited. Wonderville's an awesome place, and yeah, I don't think the bio, and I understand they have to be tight, quite captures the essence and the vibe of everything. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say, and I'll pass it over to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, James. I'm really excited to do this talk. We actually have a game by James and his brother Joe at Wonderville called the E-Cheese Zone, which, if you haven't played it, you should play it. It's a crowd punishment game. It's one of my favorite independently made games. Um, so we'll get to that. But first, hello, my name's Mark. Thank you for the introduction. I'm going to talk about arcade building, and I'm going to get constantly interrupted by kittens, which is great. But for me, it'll be a lot of like moving them off of my desk. All right, let me share my screen and get this rolling. All right. All right. Can everybody see this? Obligatory ask at the beginning of the presentation.
Yes.
Sweet. I'm going to talk about building an indie arcade, and this is both like building physical indie arcade cabinets and as well as like building an indie arcade community, because I've been largely involved in both of those things. And so the space that I co-own with my partner Stephanie is called Wonderville. Wonderville.nyc is our website, and at Wonderville NYC on social media. We opened in 2019, and we're about to celebrate our 6th birthday very soon, in the next couple months. I'm going to talk about basically my journey, how we got to Wonderville, and then a little bit about other work I do in the arcade scene here in Brooklyn, New York. And so, yeah, I'm going to take this back to a place called Death by Audio, which was in warehouse space that I lived in New York from 2009 to 2014. And on the left was a photo taken from the 2nd floor. We had hung a helicopter cargo net above the kitchen that could hold a car's worth of weight. And so this is kind of what this place was like. There were 10 people who lived here, all sorts of musicians and artists. And on the right is a picture of me with my now wife, Stephanie, when we met back in 2010. She was specializing in filing nonprofit paperwork. And so when I moved in, Death by Audio was a nonprofit, and Stephanie had helped them file their legal paperwork. So she's very experienced with like licensing and regulations and all of that sort of thing, even, 10 years before this all started. Death by Audio was started by this person here on the left, Oliver Ackerman. He is the singer of a band called A Place to Bury Strangers. And they have been a touring band for almost 20 years, I want to say, at this point. And Oliver builds custom guitar pedals, pictured here on the right. And Death by Audio was a place where they could manufacture these guitar pedals, and they did it all in-house. So I would wake up and I would go downstairs, and there would be several people just soldering circuit boards, putting guitar pedals together. And I learned a lot from Death by Audio about screen printing and about manufacturing and all of that sort of thing. It's a very small operation. It's very boutique. And it's funny, I guess in 2020, when everybody had stimulus money, they actually were super successful, and now they have a larger staff, and they're doing more than just guitar pedals. So yeah, visit Death by Audio if you're interested in this kind of stuff. But basically, this was the nexus of what happened here. It was also a show space, and so attached to where we lived was a venue, and bands were there pretty much every night of the week. It wasn't a bar, it wasn't like a legal venue, it was like one of these underground warehouses. And so we learned a lot about running events and like all of the logistical operations from just being adjacent to this venue. So in 2010, I had this idea to build a MAME arcade cabinet, which is a multi-arcade machine emulator. And there was this old eMac computer lying around at Death by Audio, and it could run this emulator of old games, you know, like X-Men and Altered Beasts and these old kind of Sega, Nintendo arcade games. And so this was my first venture into building an arcade cabinet. We had this like white laminated plywood for some reason, and my roommate, who was a woodworker, kind of helped cut and assemble it. And we put it in the venue. Sorry, too fast. And kind of let people play for a quarter. And it was really successful, you know. And so through this, I met the folks who were running a nonprofit in New York called Baby Castles. And Baby Castles was a video game arts organization in New York. And they saw this cabinet and they said, like, hey, can we replace this computer with one that we could install indie games on? And in this, you can't really see it, but I believe this is Pole Riders by Bennett Foddy. It's one of the early Sports Friends game. So in 2010, we did a gallery together where we installed what essentially became the Sports Friends collection. It was Hokra, Pole Riders, JS Joust, which wasn't on an arcade, it was played in person. But through Baby Castles, I started meeting folks in the local Brooklyn arcade scene who were making independent games. And so I started reaching out. At this point, the NYU Game Center was brand new. So I just sent an email and I said, does anybody want to build arcade cabinets? And I would put them in Death by Audio. And so, you know, we got a couple of responses. This is the team behind a game called Crystal Brawl, which we built back in 2013. And we cut all the wood. And then we put it at Death by Audio. And during the launch party, we met some other developers and we started building more games. So Particle Mace and Powerboat Italia 88, these were also built at Death by Audio, and they launched also in 2014. And so there was some momentum happening here. You know, I started realizing there were really interesting independent arcade games being made, mostly at universities. I was finding them at the New School, at NYU, at Pratt, and sort of would just go to student shows, find a game and say, hey, can I build a cabinet for this? You know, and I would invite the developer over. And it was really cool because, you know, they were game developers. They had never really held a circular saw before. So it was always a collaborative endeavor where I would kind of show them how to use a saw, how to paint, how to wire electronics, and we would build this sculpture together. So in 2014, Vice Media actually bought out the entire block and Death by Audio closed. And so there's a documentary called Goodnight Brooklyn, which is all about how this all happened. But because Death by Audio closed, we now had at this point a few arcades that had no home. And so from 2014 to 2018, I was renting a lot of U-Haul box trucks and moving these games around to whoever would host them. Music venues, art galleries, corporate offices. And we would pop up We would run some events, and then at the end of a month, we would get another U-Haul and transport them to the next place. Um, we also got into a lot of festivals. On the left is the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And to this day, they still run an annual Sam arcade. And so it was really the first time we got in, it was really flattering to bring a bunch of homemade arcades to the Smithsonian. On the right is the Maker Faire in New York, which kind of is in a different state now, but it was a great place to showcase games, a lot of kids that never had played them before. Um, and we got to collaborate with other venues in New York. This place was called the Dream House, and it was kind of like a queer kind of dance club. But they had materials, and we collaborated and built this Dreambox arcade out of stuff they had lying around. And so this is a multi-cab filled with 9 different games by local queer game developers in New York. We also worked on other non-cabinet projects. So we had a project called Drink Rink, which was like tracking drinks and koozies on the top of a surface. And we refurbished a pinball machine from 1959 that still lives at Wonderville to this day. Themed around A Place to Bury Strangers, Oliver's band. So fog machines, laser lights, strobes, all sorts of things that reflected their performance on a stage. And during this time, we had an organization, nonprofit called Death by Audio Arcade. And so we had members and we had people donating money because moving cabinets cost money. Every time we moved them in a box truck, something would happen. Particle mace like fell down a flight of stairs. There was constant refurbishing. We needed new LCD screens. Computers died. So it was a money hole, right? From 2014 to 2018, while the games are on the road in this kind of traveling circus, we're sort of just like constantly pumping money, our own money, into fixing them, into moving them, into renting box trucks, hiring people to come and like help us out. Because yeah, it was a lot of work. And so in 2018, we had friends who owned this bar, Secret Project Robot, which we knew them from back in the Death by Audio days. They had another kind of warehouse space similar to ours. And they said, we love what you're doing with the arcades. We had exhibited at their space in the past. And they said, we're trying to actually sell this place. And we wanted to offer it to you. And so we were flattered. Stephanie and I knew a lot about running a venue through Death by Audio, but we didn't know much about running a bar. And we certainly didn't have the money to buy the business. And so we launched a Kickstarter in early 2019. And we knew that we were going to get the space in May of 2019, and the Kickstarter went live in March. So we pretty much had like a month to figure out what we were doing and what we would do if we didn't hit the goal. And so we had a $70,000 goal. We ended up getting over $100,000. Kickstarter was very skeptical we were going to get this amount of money, but the community was really enthusiastic. We did a bunch of different rewards, and we hit our goal. These two, the cabinet on the left actually was part of the grand prize, which was like a custom arcade cabinet. And this was sent to the Two-Bit Circus in LA. On the right was another Kickstarter goal where we said we would carve your name into an arcade cabinet. And so, I have a lot of experience now with Kickstarter. So if you have any Kickstarter questions, happy to do it. The thing I would say up front is to please just know what you're doing with your prizes before you announce the campaign. This ended up being a little more work than we were prepared for. So then we set about transforming into Wonderville. And because we were just buying the business directly, we were only closed for 3 days. Usually when you start a business, you talk to the landlord and you have all of these months to do renovations and everything. But because we were basically signing the lease over from our friends to us, there was no time period like that. So it was an all-hands operation. Everybody came in, we painted all the walls, we brought in all the games, and we pretty much spent the entirety of May and June of 2019 renovating whenever the bar was closed. So Wonderville has a lot going on, and I'm kind of just going to touch on a lot of this stuff. but there's licensing. We have to worry about being legal. We have staff. We have to run payroll. We have to get insurance for our staff. Maintenance, which is my primary job because we have 30 custom arcade cabinets that constantly need fixing. We have a bar program, right? So we have to make menus and we sell hot dogs. So that's another thing that we have to constantly worry about is inventory and stock and everything like that. We have a stage. So there's event booking and there's constantly emails and programming that we have to deal with and then source flyers and post them on our website. And social media. We run an Instagram, we run a TikTok, a Blue Sky, a Twitter, a Facebook. So like getting all of that working. Accounting, taxes, which I will do directly after this. Uh, Internships, we work with NYU Game Center. We have an internship where people shadow me and we fix games together. We sell merch. We have security. We live stream both on Twitch and YouTube. And we have this arcade that we curate. So there's like a lot of different aspects of running this business. And so, you know, in 2019, Stephanie and I were doing it all ourselves. And in the past few years, we've hired on managers to take some of this off of our plate so we can do some more high level things. But it really is like a mom and pop shop, and we're pretty much running it all of ourselves. Our current arcade collection is listed on this website, wonderville.nyc/games, and you can get an idea of all of the different games that we feature at Wonderville. And there's a few different categories. We have indie arcade cabinets, and these are mostly games that can be purchased. So Nidhogg 2 we were not involved in the production of this cabinet. Someone worked with Mark Messhoff to produce the cabinet, and then they were for sale. And then we bought one, and it now lives at Wonderville. Kung Fu Kickball, I actually developed, but Jonah, the developer, and we went to a factory and we started getting it produced. So Kung Fu Kickball, albeit we have the original one, is now a production arcade cabinet. And Black Emperor, which is made by Bumble Bear, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, is also a production cabinet. So this is sort of your run-of-the-mill standard arcade cabinet, joysticks and buttons for the most part. We also have art game projects, which I was struggling how to name this slide. These are essentially games that we built one-offs of, and they're probably not eligible for reproduction because of how complicated they are. They were maybe funded by a grant. We've started getting grants from the Brooklyn Arts Council. So in the center is a game called Waxwing. This was a pitch in 2023 where we said we want to make a light gun game that doesn't use guns. So we worked with Common Opera, which is another game dev studio, and they wanted to build a game where you guide a moth through a maze using a candle. And so those are actually candlesticks that were custom 3D printed, and the cabinet has this like beautiful kind of gothic feel. It has wallpaper on it. Could we produce another one? Probably, but it's a little more difficult to price out like what all this costs, especially when you're doing custom 3D printing and all of this stuff that, you know, you could do if you're making one of a cabinet, but it's hard to get into like manufacturing. On the left is Video Freak, which is a collaboration with video artist Alan Riley. And this involves a bunch of analog video gear that's been hacked so that you run the game signal through these old 1970s like analog video mixers. So another example of something that it's hard to duplicate or just really, really expensive. So these are kind of one-offs. And then we have non-cabinet games at Wonderville, and these aren't always out on the floor, but these are sort of your alt control games that we can pull out in certain parties. There's a Hungry Buddy, which is in a cake arcade, Circumnavigators, which you play by walking in a circle. And so we like to have these events where we can pull out sort of these non-cabinet games that we can feature. Sorry, 1 second. So on top of this, we run 2 residency programs. That cabinet you saw earlier with all of the names carved into it, that became our Wonder Cab. And what we decided to do is take applications for games to be featured on the Wonder Cab for 3 months at a time. And it gave us an opportunity to kind of test run games in the arcade environment to see if we wanted to invest in a full dedicated cabinet. On the right is a Pico 8 cabinet. This is really, really tiny, and we run it also for 3 months at a time for games specifically on the Pico 8 environment. And this is really easy because it's on a Raspberry Pi, and so we just swap out the SD card, put a new game on it, and it's good to go. So the Wonder Cab I want to talk a little bit more about because we wanted a way to feature games in Wonderville without having to invest heavily in a dedicated arcade cabinet. And so here's a few games that have been selected. We have a judging panel and we play the games and we choose one out of the submissions. Actually, if anyone on the call wants to submit, we are currently accepting submissions for the June 1st residency. It's open until the end of April. So I will put the link somewhere after this call if you want to submit your games. So we had these 3 games. These are just 3 of the 16 that we've featured since this program started. Trapped in Here With Me, Tough Love Arena, and Speglar. And these are 3 that we selected to build dedicated cabinets for. Speglar is kind of this Pac-Man-esque game where you're shooting against these mirrors, and Dexter, the developer, really wanted to do a cocktail cabinet inspired by 4-player Pac-Man. So we use that design to make Speglar, and Dexter worked with his artist to do all of the cabinet artwork. And this is now one of 2 Speglars. We actually just sold one to an arcade in San Francisco, which is really exciting. Tough Love Arena also, we finally, after 2 years of talking about it, finally built this last year. This is a 2-player fighting game that has rollback netcode, so it can be played online, and it has a kind of robust online community. There's a lot of people playing this game online, so it felt fitting to make a cabinet for it. This was the first Tough Love Arena, and similar to Speglar, we just sold a second one to an arcade in San Francisco. So it's really exciting because, you know, we're able to kind of build the prototypes here in New York, and then once we have all of the 3D files, all the artwork, it becomes incredibly easy to make a second one. So because we have this nonprofit and we're able to kind of like invest in the first prototypes of these machines, it then becomes easier to make copies of them. Trapped in Here With Me, the devs actually were building their own cabinet. And you can see the marquee is just like an array of LED panels, which I kind of had to be like, we need to tone this down. There's like a lot of epileptic things that can happen. But they had their own fabricators. They were bringing this to Wonderville to playtest as like a half cabinet. And then they asked to bring it in, and we said, can you make it a full cabinet so it can sit on the floor? And they said, yeah. And they've been making changes to their game through the last year or so. And then this place in San Francisco that actually ordered cabinets from me also ordered a Trapped in Here With Me from them. So it was really interesting because we're sort of developing in parallel. And you know, as new places open, they were like, you know what, we like this game as well. Can you put us in touch with the people that make it? And so it's a nice community where we can sort of like all work together to, you know, market these games. The Pico 8 games have been a mix of lots of different styles, puzzle games, shooters, all sorts of things. If you're not familiar with the Pico 8 platform, it's a really, really great game engine that's programmed in Lua. We haven't turned Pico 8 games into full-size cabinets, but it is nice to have this Pico 8 residency because we're able to feature games from Spain, from France, from Australia. We've had submissions from all around the world, and it's a really great online community. So that's been really exciting. Wonderville is also a performance space. And so every night of the week, there are different kinds of events that happen. Here's just kind of like a taste of what happens here. We have an experimental electronic music meetup. We do Smash Bash, which is kind of a DJ party where they play Smash Brothers the whole time. The Donut Lounge is a hip hop showcase with local producers and rappers. Disaster Piece is a movie night where they pick a really awful movie, and it's sort of like a Rocky Horror situation where people are like, you know, throwing stuff at the screen and cheering. We do drag shows. Distant Lands was a drag show. was it Adventure Time? Yeah. So they do really cool themes, and there's a big drag community here in New York. And then the Trombone Champ launch party, we like to do these parties for other independent games that are being released. Aren't necessarily good candidates for arcade cabinets, but we do like to support the local game dev community and do launch parties. Every Wednesday, we do open Hive Night for Killer Queen. And if you're not familiar with Killer Queen, this is probably the most popular independently made arcade. I think there's something like 100 of them around the US, and it's 5-on-5. So there's two cabinets, the gold team versus the blue team. And every Wednesday is like league night. So you can imagine like skee ball, people show up with like t-shirts, they're playing competitively. Um, and it's got a really great community. We were kind of skeptical they would come every Wednesday, but they do. And it is also nice because it's a good night to tell people to come play the arcade games because Killer Queen's happening. They're live streaming, they're running their tournament, but also all the other games are free to play. There's not like a loud band playing. So we keep it as like our arcade night. Killer Queen also wanted to do a monthly tournament. So on the first Saturday of the month, we do the Bring Your Own Team tournament, and they do kind of a larger monthly thing. And this is what the Killer Queen live stream looks like. They have a lot of integrated stat tracking and stuff like that. So if you want to see what the gameplay is like on our YouTube channel, if you go to @Wonderville NYC, you could see some of the Killer Queen archives. It's a fascinating game. I teach it when I teach game design. It was a field game first before it was an arcade game, but it's definitely like a quintessential part of our space. At the end of every month, we host a playtest night, which is a time for developers to come to Wonderville with works in progress. And it's really cool because, I saw games at MagFest and other festivals that were featured at playtest night, and they were sort of these janky, like block puzzles, and then they were developed into an actual working game. So, I try to attend this every month because it's a really good opportunity to see what people are making. Developers that have launched arcades at Wonderville come back with new content that they're working on. And it's just a really great community run event. Blake Andrews, who is now popular on Twitter for a horse racing game, which I just found out about yesterday. But Blake's been hosting 2-hour game jam clubs on the second Saturday of the month in like every game engine imaginable. I'm not even sure how they do it. This flyer is for Scratch. They've done Bitsy. They've done like Mario 64 Builder. They did Doom Wads, Google Sheets, Zoom. I think there was a game jam on Zoom. So like Blake will do a short lesson in how to use the game engine. They prototype for 2 hours and they have like a 30-minute presentation of what people made. And so it's like these quick and dirty prototypes. And it's a really great event. Like I love to see what is happening at the Game Jam Club. And so with all of these community events, we started a new nonprofit called Wonderville Projects. And so this is a 501c3. You can make tax-deductible donations, and it helps us to run these programs like the Game Jam Club, the playtest nights, the residency programs, because these are more like community events than bar events. And so it was helpful to have like a tangential organization for that. So that's pretty much Wonderville in a nutshell. And so I'm going to talk about a little bit about what I do outside of Wonderville, which is kind of tangential. James mentioned at the top of the call that I've had corporate clients, that come to Wonderville and they love these custom arcades. And then we sort of talk about like what we want to have custom games for our company. So on the left is Botnet Slayer, which is a CenturyLink game that I collaborated with one of my former students on. That was shipped out to Denver to the CenturyLink offices. In the center are 2 arcades I sold to the Museum of the Moving Image here in Queens in New York, and they use them for rotating residencies. One of them I actually convinced to do Pico 8 because it was an easier software to update. And so I believe if they haven't changed it, one of them is still a Pico 8 cabinet. And then this image on the right, these are 4 JetBlue cabinets that we did 2 years ago for a JetBlue pop-up in Soho. And so they wanted 4 custom games that were all kind of JetBlue themed, and I built the cabinets for them. I've also built arcades for universities. So on the left is a 4-player arcade for Pratt University, and then on the right is Quinnipiac, and they are using them in their game design program, so students could put their games on an arcade cabinet and see how it feels with joysticks and buttons and everything. So both of these have been worked into the programs. I'm actually currently in the process of building a tabletop version for Quinnipiac so they can more easily like carry it to other conventions and things. Also, wedding gifts. I don't know. This is a very strange build, and I don't know how to categorize it, but um, someone commissioned a game from a Pico 8 developer on Twitter called Luckily Together that featured the bride and groom in a platformer kind of similar to Mario Brothers, and then I built the cabinet for it. So sometimes I get these cute jobs that are really fun to build. Um, and then, as James mentioned, I also teach at ITP, which is a graduate program at NYU. I actually went to school there from 2011 to 2013. But one of my thesis advisors came to Death by Audio when we were building arcades and said, you should really pitch this as a class. And so I taught the class in 2015 and 2016. This is actually cabinets from the very first version of the class back in 2015. Took some years off and then came back after the pandemic, and I've been teaching it from 2021 until now. And so this is now how the class is currently structured. In the first half of the class, I teach 7 weeks. We cover Intro to Unity. I teach it in 2D because it's arcade games. So we do 2D game design lessons. We do animations and sprites. We also cover Arduino programming and how to use the laser cutter. And then for midterm projects, the students make an alt control project, which is mostly kind of like a controller that plugs into their laptop. And then in the second half of the class, they get into groups, and the groups are divided into fabricators, artists, and game developers. And they learn 3D modeling in Fusion 360, and they learn how to cut plywood on a CNC machine. They learn other kinds of woodworking techniques, vinyl cutting and printing, and then we do some weeks of play testing before they present their final arcade cabinet. And so students in this class are making 2 arcade games in the semester, one as a solo developer as a midterm, and then one as part of a group for the final project. It's a lot of stuff in one semester, but the work is incredible. Here are a selection of midterms from this class. I'll just briefly talk about them. On the top left is like a moth where each eye is a photocell, and you held a flashlight, and if you shined it on the left, the moth on screen moved to the left. If you shined it on the right, the moth moved to the right. And it was one of these vertical scrolling, like avoid all the obstacles kind of games. In the middle, this person was really good at crocheting and wanted to make sort of a Pac-Man snake style game using crocheted joystick ball tops. So that was really fun. On the right, and actually the cow as well, my class ran concurrently with a silicone casting class. So we got all of these crazy silicone controllers that year. The one on the right is an aspic, which is like an old 1950s Jello mold, but there were buttons embedded in it. And the cow on the bottom left is called Utter Mayhem, and the udders were cast in silicone, and they had magnets with Hall effect sensors so that you could squeeze the udders to play a rhythm game. And really fascinating. She's been showcasing that all across the US at different conventions. I believe this photo is from like a Santa Fe gallery. The last 2 were from this semester. The surfboard used elastic flex sensors to control a surfer. And then the paper cutter used the slicing mechanic to chop vegetables in your office. And so you had to kind of chop as fast as you can without getting caught by your coworkers. So these are midterm projects. Again, 7 weeks. They're pretty much building a Unity game and a controller in that time. And then these are a selection of some of the cabinets that have been produced as part of this class. And so, uh, you know, we try not to convince them to build full-size cabinets because one, they're very difficult to move. So I say like try and build something you could fit into the back of an Uber because smaller is easier to transport. And last semester, unbeknownst to me, my students applied for a few different festivals. And so Gemsy Frenzy in the bottom center and then Rice to the direct right of it were both accepted to MagFest in Washington, D.C., which was great. They drove the cabinets down and they were featured for 3 days there. They were also accepted to Alt Control at GDC in San Francisco. And I didn't know how they were going to get the cabinets out there, but they ended up disassembling all of them and kind of flat packing them and then reassembling them when they got to GDC. This is New Arcade ITP is the Instagram, Blue Sky, Twitter if you want to follow it. But something really amazing happened, which was that Rice specifically got covered by IGN and had like this viral moment. So I'm going to play that video just so you can see how that went.
Here's an arcade game where you have to finish your dinner without pissing off your parents. It's called Rice, and you can consume your food by using the chopsticks with a special mechanism meant to mimic the act of scooping rice out of a bowl, or you can tilt your bowl forward to offload more food to your little white dog. Just don't do it when your parents are looking at you. You'll also have to accept some veggies when your parents offer them to you. Definitely give those to the dog too. Refuse too many veggies or get caught feeding the dog too many times and it's game over. This is just one of many fun projects we saw at this year's GDC, but if you want to play Rice in person, it's currently playable at Wonderville in Brooklyn. Check it out. Here's an arcade game where you have to finish your...
Go back. Funny story. It is not currently at Wonderville. We've talked about it, but I think for a lot of these games, the wear and tear and the maintenance is a little more intense. So we've been talking with the devs about putting it at NYU temporarily until we can get some feedback on what breaks and how often, and then we can move it to Wonderville in the future.
Here's an arcade game where you have to finish your dinner without pissing off your...
We're good on this. Let's advance to the next
parents.
So yeah, that's it. Thanks, James. I have a lot of links here if you want to follow anything. This is my personal info with my email. So, if anyone has questions about arcade building or alt control or anything from this talk, feel free to reach out. Wonderville website, social media. Also, hello@Wonderville is general inquiries if you want to book an event with us. We also have a Discord at wonderville.nyc/Discord. New Arcade is at New Arcade ITP. And then if you want to follow either of the kittens that have been interrupting my talk, you can follow them as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just to let people know, the kittens being allowed in was something I definitely encourage. So I'll take that one. So I guess I'm really curious in terms of the arcades and games. Do you see a lot of games that start off as designed for arcade machines, or are there a lot of games that start off kind of without an arcade machine and then kind of turn into it?
I think both. So for instance, like the cabinets that I was building originally, those games were done, like Particle Mace, Kung Fu Kickball. Those were finished games that we were like, this would work really well in the arcade. But Waxwing, the Moth in a Maze, that whole concept was developed as an arcade cabinet from start to finish. And there's a couple other developers like Nick Santinello, who made Powerboat, just released a new cabinet called Hoverburger, which he started designing as an arcade game with like a big rotary dial. And so he built like a miniature version of it before the full-size cabinet, but it was never going to be like a Steam game. It was always intended to be an arcade. You're muted, James. Sorry.
Thank you. I turned on my camera and for some reason I just assumed like, oh yeah, I'm talking now. I guess like in that regard too, for the student games for the alt control, like would you say that there's a big difference between like arcade machines and then alt control games? And I know you had a little bit about like the art arcade machines. Like where are those boundaries and like how would you encourage students or developers to explore any of those areas?
it's funny because I think in grad school, people want to skew for the weirdest possible, uh, arcade. And so the trade-off here is like the weirder you make the game, the stranger the controls, the more susceptible you are to maintenance, right? And so we've featured some of my student games at Wonderville, but they're generally the ones that have joysticks and buttons because I know how to fix those. They're like a known interface. Gemsy Frenzy has two ropes that you pull, and they go through this complicated 3D printed pulley system. And so, those kinds of games, one, if they break, I don't know how to fix it. I might have to contact the developers. And two, like if they break every day, I don't know if it's a good idea for Wonderville, right? Just based on the amount of foot traffic we get and people playing.
Totally. That's kind of fascinating. Like, I guess I hadn't considered how the weirder a game could be, weirder used in a non-derogatory good way here. Um, the fact that the alt control may attract more people, but it also means it's more susceptible to breakage.
Yeah, and I sort of tell my students when they embark on this arcade design project, like some of you might make a really strange game that you're going to take apart after the semester ends. The girl who made the cow udders, her final project was like this pirate ship, and it was like this custom steering wheel and these like 3D printed cannons, and that thing like made it to the showcase and then it
Hmm.
was like no, it's got to come apart. Like it was just
Hmm.
so many custom fabricated parts, everything kind of worked. And like I encourage this, right? I want you to make
Hmm.
weird interfaces, but the weirder they are, the more custom they are, the more they're going to break, right?
Right.
You buy a joystick that's meant for an arcade cabinet, like that's going to last for like 10 years. um the
Right. It's designed for that wear and tear.
Yeah, exactly.
That
Um,
makes sense. Also the I should have mentioned it earlier, but the floor is open in case anyone has any questions. Those are just some things on the top of my head that I was interested in asking. Um, this might be a bit of a sidetrack related to the wear and tear of controllers. Um, and you can tell me if this is just something I made up or not, but I thought there was a concept called like the child test or like the kid test.
hmm.
Is that like a real thing?
I would say putting an arcade cabinet in front of kids at, say, like a children's museum is akin to putting it in front of drunk people at a bar. Um,
Okay.
we get somewhat of a similar response, although I do think adults, no matter how much alcohol they've consumed, still can respect that these are like these custom arcades, and maybe I shouldn't like put all my weight on the joysticks and like hang off of the front of the cabinet, which kids will do, right? And so I've sold some cabinets to people who run all ages arcades, and there's things that we don't think about that kids do, which is like, oh, like we need to think that some kid is going to grab a joystick and just like do this as fast as possible. And it's
Hmm.
like you have to plan for that. And I think if you're opening an arcade, like having someone who knows maintenance, like on staff or like the owner does that because it's going to be a constant job, you know?
Right. I didn't think about, oh man. Yeah, kids pulling on arcade cabinets was not something I would have ever planned for.
Mhm.
Um, that's wild. Is that just like extra weight on the bottom, or like how do you? I know it's like a super specific question. I'm just like, I don't know how you deal with that.
We redesigned so Kung Fu Kickball is in production, right? And
Hmm.
the first one that we designed was very slim, but the console was big because it's 4 players. And so if you put all your weight on the console, you could tip it forward. No one does this at Wonderville because we're adults. But when we sold one, like the person was like, "Oh yeah, if a kid grabbed this and like hung off of it like a monkey, it could fall on them." And
Yeah,
so we redesigned it to be wider so that like that wouldn't happen. But it's
gotcha.
not something we would have thought about because we weren't designing these with like children in mind.
Hmm. That's really funny. Um, I guess a separate direction. for students looking to make video games or make them pop, are there any tips or tricks or reasons not to build it into an alt control? Like if someone's like, I have this game and I really want to showcase it, but I don't know if I should make an alt control for it or not. Like, what do you think would be the considerations for that?
So when my students work on their alt control midterm, I tell them to kind of approach it from two ways, which is one, you have a game concept, and then you're building the alt control to kind of play that game. The second is that you have an alt control concept and you're making a game that works with that object. And so like the paper slicer, she had a paper. She was like, I want to make a game out of a paper slicer. And it was like, what is that? Oh, I'm making guacamole in the office. So like things would appear, you would slice them or not slice them, and that was like the game, right? I think the girl who made the knitted joysticks had this concept of like a Pac-Man snake game. And so those were just joysticks, but because she was into crocheting, like wanted to make them unique and everything. So I think it depends. I think the person who made the surfboard like came at it from both ways. It's like the game and the controller are both cohesive and they work together. You're actually using the surfboard to control the surfer in the game, you know?
That makes a ton of sense. Yeah. I sometimes I'm like working on a game, and it's partway through development, and I start wondering if there's like any possibility of attaching an alt control to it or not. And I'm always just a little hesitant because I'm like, I don't know if I'm far enough along in the process, or like if I add this alt control to it, is it just going to be kind of like additional paraphernalia for showcasing, and like it shouldn't be expected as part of the core thing, because like I know distribution comes into it a lot too. Like, can you put something up on Steam? Like Trombone Champion, I know Sox was working on an alt control for it, and I could really see that make the game pop, but the game also is very playable without an alt control, right? But it's like the game screams alt control because you're playing a trombone, and it's just so silly because there's already Guitar Hero and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I also did an alt control trombone champ controller,
Oh, okay.
as did like 40 other people.
Mhm.
There was like this weird time on Twitter where we were all making it was like who's gonna make the trombone champ controller first, and like there were like 10 of us doing it. But none of those were gonna hold up, right? Like I brought mine to MagFest and it broke immediately. And like mine was literally the circuit board from a optical mouse on a trombone slide. So it wasn't like very complicated at all. But even the wear and tear of like the trombone slide can fall out and then like the circuit board falls on the ground and like breaks and like then it's like okay, I have to crack open another mouse. So it's just there's all sorts of things that you don't anticipate from these alt control projects. And so while I think there's like something to be said about like producing an alt control controller for like an event or for a festival, having it work day after day in an arcade setting is a different story, you know?
I can totally see that. My bad. It may have been I may have been thinking of your trombone champion game. I could have sworn Sox was working on it too, but it might just because he really liked the game.
Oh no, he
I don't
was.
remember. Oh,
He
he was.
also made one, and
Okay.
we actually worked together on a lot of the concepts.
Hmm.
When we did a trombone champ launch party, somebody drove from Connecticut with their trombone champ controller. So it was like people were making these, and
Hmm.
they just wanted to do it because it was like such a cool and exciting game.
Oh, totally.
Like Dan and Jackie are friends of mine, and I remember when they were porting it to the Switch, they were like, "Can we make a thing that you snap a Switch Joy-Con into so that you can play it?" And it was a little more engineering than I had time to do, but it was like, yeah, you could use the hardware from these consoles to make a unique version of your game. Um, but I know even for Trombone Champ, even though there was like less than 30 people who were making custom trombone champ controllers, that they pushed out an update where you could calibrate your custom trombone champ controller. And
That
so
is so cool.
you're like selling this game globally. You have it in VR. Like you do not need to address the like dozen people who are making a trombone champ controller, but because you support this and it gets you viral videos, like it was like, here are the options for your custom controller in the menu now.
Right. Oh, that's so cool. I'm glad I wasn't wrong about the socks thing because I was like, oh no, did I totally misremember? Um, I guess along these lines, I'm also kind of curious. Because like you mentioned, like there's only maybe like a dozen or like 100 people kind of like interested in doing all controllers for a trombone champion. Um, but if you're a student and you're trying to make a game, let's say an all control game or kind of a custom arcade cabinet game, what would be your advice for making it stand out and pop? Because I know there are also a lot of situations where it's like you make this thing and then like you build it and they do not come. Like how what would be your advice for like hedging bets or making sure that that can go as smoothly as possible?
I would say if you have other fabrication skills other than game development, it's good to think about that. Like my favorite alt control projects came out of the year where my students were also taking this silicone casting class because it was like no one did that before. So having like these silicone game controllers was like totally new and unique. Um, and the Gemsy Frenzy team was on that idea because all semester, one of the girls from that group was like, I really want to make a game where you pull on ropes. And so it was like they couldn't get that idea out of their heads. And so when it came to the cabinet, they were like, all right, let's do the ropes. You know what I mean? Um, and so I think there's like, I don't know, thinking about interfaces, like what actions do you do and how can that be translated into an input? Um, and we don't use Arduinos. We use the Teensy microcontroller, which is really amazing
Oh,
because it's very easy to send key presses or like joystick axes just using the Teensy's built-in libraries. So if you have like, I don't know, a light sensor, you could then be like, joystick x-axis is just this light sensor. And in Unity, what would have been the left joystick on a gamepad is now this like light sensor. You know what I mean? And so, trying to keep it simple, like not going overboard. I think for a lot of these alt control games, like one input is really all you need. Like you don't have to go too crazy with it because, there was a game where somebody just put a mouse on the end of a broom. And it was like it wasn't even any Arduino programming,
that's
but
so
because
good.
you're like pushing this mouse along the floor, and in the game, you were moving the camera around to try and like find a mouse who was like running around your apartment. But it was like people loved just like this action of like sweeping to control the game. And it was like you could do this right now. You could duct tape your mouse to the end of a broom and like alt control game, you know? Um, so I think there's like a lot to be said about like keeping it simple and not going too crazy.
I I hate love that idea so much. Oh man, that's like totally my jam because that's genius. It's so simple, but yeah, like I totally get it. I would love to play that game. Oh man, I hate that so much. And like in a good way. That's like a good hate. Oh man. I guess like a follow-up question to kind of that. I'm also really curious kind of about Wonderville and just public spaces. How these games kind of like coexist and like are they generally symbiotic? Do they kind of step on each other's feet? Do you see a lot of like players jumping from one game to the other? Like how, because I know when we think about video games, we mostly think about them in isolation. But when they're being presented kind of for a public venue, be it an alt control or a arcade cabinet, which are very much designed for kind of public spaces, like how does that change the dynamic?
Mm.
I mean, just not only interacting with the individual game, but just like the space itself and each game effect on each other.
Yeah, and I think we still struggle with this because if you put a four-player game directly next to a four-player game, whoever's on this side and this side like are really on top of each other, right? So we try to really think about this with layout of like which games go where. And we have a performance space. So the games that are closer to the stage don't get as much play if there's like a band on the stage, right? And also when it comes to performances, we tell all the musicians like, hey, you know, we're gonna sell tickets and you're gonna play a show, but a lot of audience members may not watch your band and may play Killer Queen the whole time. And like that's just the vibe of this space, you know? And I think, you know, saying it up front, a lot of people get it because we can't like police everyone and be like, all right, the band's
Right.
on, everybody, like face front, you know, and this is why comedy didn't really work at Wonderville. Like we tried doing comedy shows and it was just like everybody's playing arcade games. They're not gonna like pay attention 100% of the time. Um, so the whole like mixed use space does present some challenges, but we've also had bands on tour that come to Wonderville and they're like, oh my God, what are all these games? They're all free to play. Like, I've never seen these before. And like, even like doing a hip hop show with people from the Bronx that are like, I had no idea this existed. Like, this is incredible. Like, how do we do more events here? So it's cool to like introduce people who are, you know, decidedly not gamers into this space and be like, no, like these are approachable. Like, you know, Pac-Man, right? Like, this is very, like, you can play this. Here's a joystick and a button. Like, you know what to do. And I think having that allows people to like play the games without feeling like, oh, I play video games. I don't know what's going on, you know? And so, yeah, we try to. My partner Stephanie's also not a gamer, so whenever we bring a new game in, I'm like, Steph, sit and play this. Like, can you figure this out? You know, and it's a good gauge on like, you know, your non-gamer audience.
I absolutely love that. Yeah, my partner's also really good for playtesting things as well, because it's like if there's mechanics that I didn't explain or whatever, I just love the fact that I have somebody that I can just go to directly and say, "Hey, is this thing working the way that like I would hope an audience would get it?" And be able to correct it like on the fly is just amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I never I didn't consider the idea of having two arcade machines next to each other. I guess a final question would be, and understand that Wonderville is um well, obviously the best barcade, but it's one of many barcades, and they may all be looking for different things. What would be advice for like making an arcade machine for a venue like that? What would be the things that you want out of an arcade machine? If someone's like say, "Hey, I got this arcade machine, like maybe you'd like to look at it." Like, what would be the things that you want out of that?
Yeah. Oh, first of all, I should say we can't legally say barcade. That is a trademark.
Oh no, okay, my
And if
bad.
you use just a word
Yeah,
of advice, if you use barcade in
colloquially. Mhm.
non-barcade context, you will hear from their lawyers. Uh,
Okay.
which has surprisingly only happened to us once, but
Mhm.
we are a bar arcade.
Bar arcade. Okay.
So this is an interesting question too. So when I first started building arcades, I was like, they're all multiplayer, like 2 player, 4 player. I want to get people in physical space playing games together. And you know, that was my intention for a long time. And um we did a lot of 4 player games. And then sometime in like 2021, we started getting a lot of 1 player high score chase games. And
Hmm.
like I think Black Emperor was the first one, but now we have Trapped in Here with Me, Hoverburger, Bumpy Grumpy. We have all of these games that are just 1 player, like high score, and then another person comes up, and now there's like Hoverburger rolls out a new map on Mondays. So on Sunday evening, no matter what the event is, there's 5 people that show up to try to get the top score on Hoverburger before the bar closes at 2 in the morning. And like, I've learned that our security guard has been kicking these people out at the end of the night because they're just grinding on Hoverburger until they can't anymore, like until the machine
Hmm.
gets unplugged. And it's just like, it's a different kind of obsession, right? Um, like Particle Mace is a great game, and I think if you're hanging out at the bar with your friends, like let's go play a round of Particle Mace. Cool, let's go play a round of Power Boats, and you can like jump around Wonderville and play all the games. But if you're at Wonderville like a lot and you want your name on the scoreboard, like there's this like grinding aspect to these 1 player games that you don't get out of the 4 player games. Um, this doesn't have anything to do with interfaces, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
Bumpy Grumpy is a joystick, Hoverburger is a rotary encoder, so it's a little different. But these are all like kind of approachable arcade games. You know, as for like interfaces, especially when it comes to alt control stuff, I would like a game to go into a less trafficked environment that's a little more controlled to see how those interfaces work before we bring it in, right? And NYU has actually agreed to have an arcade on the second floor so that we could move some student games there as like an on-ramp to Wonderville. So it's like, okay, let's monitor these games. What breaks? Like in Rice, like those chopsticks, even at GDC, broke a bunch of times. So it's like, what's the solution now? If we wanted this at Wonderville, can you get this in like a steel ball bearing? Like what breaks so that we can now say, okay, in order for this to come to Wonderville, these 3D printed parts can't be plastic anymore, right? They have to be stronger and they have to be more durable. Otherwise, it's a bad look because your game breaks every day. And then it's like you end up at Wonderville and there's like an out of order sign, like the pinball machine, which is like my Sisyphean boulder that I'm like constantly fixing, you know? And it's just not great, you know, to have a broken machine in there.
That makes sense. Yeah, thank you. I think, do you have any final messages or a final sign off?
No, I mean, like, if anyone has questions about this scene in general or like building arcades, alt control, my email is up there. Happy to chat about it. Come to Wonderville, check out the games. You know, we're open 7 days a week.
It's a really great venue. Yeah, thank you again. And yeah, this is the final speaker in the Northeastern Games speaker series. Be sure to check out the program and yeah, thank you for coming. Yeah,
Thanks,
see you
kids.
next time.